Hey gang, today we are in Brattleboro, Vermont, and we are going to be visiting the grave of a man named Big Jim Fisk. We're going back to the Victorian era, and it's a scandalous story. We're here at Prospect Hill Cemetery. We're going to take a rather long walk to his grave because it's a rather long story, very interesting story, so let's get on with it. And let's look at some cool stones as we go. The story of Big Jim Fisk and his woman. You're going to hear all about her, but let's just start with, well, actually it was not his, just his woman, but you're going to hear all about her, Josie. But Jim Fisk will start with a little background on where he came from growing up. He was born in the hamlet of Pownall, Vermont, in Bennington County, 1835. And after a brief period in school, he ran away in 1850 and he joined Van Amberg's Mammoth Circus and Menagerie. Not sure what he was doing there, but that was kind of his first thing. Later on, he became a hotel waiter, and then next after that, he went into business with his father. Well, his father had a business, I should say, and he became a peddler. Pretty good at it. He had applied what he learned from the circus to his peddling, and he ended up partnering with his father and they grew the business. Things were looking pretty good for Big Jim. In 1854, he married a very young woman named Lucy Moore. Very young, she was only 15 years old. But at the time, it wasn't unusual. She was an orphan raised by her uncle, who was from Springfield, Massachusetts. Now in 1861, he started to sell textiles to the government, and he would start to do some unsavory things, smuggling. And you could make a lot of money smuggling, especially during the Civil War, and that's what he did. He smuggled cotton across enemy lines. He's getting pretty rich, making a lot of money. Now at the end of the war, after he was super rich, and after he overheard of the siege of Petersburg, again this is at the end of the war, near the end of the war, of course that was leading to a Confederate defeat. He knew that, and he took that intel, and he sent an underling on a fast boat to London to short as many of the Confederate bonds as possible before anyone could find out about it. So he's basically a crook from the start. And Big Jim would find another crook to work with, a guy named Jay Gould. And together they would put together a very well-planned raid to next gain control of the railroad. Now we're getting into battles with the railroad barons like a Cornelius Vanderbilt. And they did run right into him. They had basically bribed the entire New York legislature to retroactively legalize a scheme that they had put together to rob that Baron Cornelius Vanderbilt. And it wouldn't just be that. They had all kinds of schemes they were putting together. Bigger and bigger schemes. They were even known to partner with the infamous New York politician. If you guys have ever heard of Boss Tweed, Tammany Hall, certain William M. Tweed. Now, corruption, you can't really get any bigger than Tammany Hall. when it comes to corruption. So they were pretty wired in. Bribery at its highest level. And I would say at their height, they even attempted to fix and corner the gold market. It was September 24th, 1869, Black Friday. Now, without getting into the details, basically these two schemers really were responsible for basically that event. Now, Big old Jim was not just a crook, he was a ladies' man. And he was quite the player of the day. So what he would do is he would basically stand on the street corner. Now, he's like a kind of a pudgy, he's becoming a pudgy guy now. He's got this mustache, the wax handlebar. Not like that, it's like straight out, like way out. And he would stand on the street corner and he would like wave to the women and hold $100 bills, like wave it at them. Here, honey, come talk to me. And then, of course, he would chat with them, twisting his mustache. He'd have his pudgy face. Now, you know, he's married. Lucy, his wife, she tolerated a lot of this stuff. But it was probably because she had her own lover, a woman named Fanny Herod. She lived in Boston. Now, it is in New York when he finally was to meet his match. And when I say meet his match, I mean that in more than one way. And her name was Josie Mansfield. She was originally from Boston. And a little bit on her background, she was the first and only child, and sadly, she was pretty terribly abused as she grew up by her uncle. She moved to New York and was trying to work as an actress, not doing such a great job. I should say not very successful. Basically living at the poverty line. But luckily for her, she was extra special for Big Jim Fisk. He's like, I really like her. She was said in the time to be a voluptuous beauty by Victorian standards of female desirability. Now, it must have been the time, but when you look at the picture of her, she really looks like she's kind of, I don't know about being the beauty, but hey, you know. To each his own, and Big Jim, he was, you know, they were probably meant for each other. He set up an apartment for Josie just a few doors down from his Erie Railroad headquarters. It was on 23rd Street, West 23rd Street. And he had this covered corridor built linking one of the back doors of the apartment right to his headquarters. And of course, you know, being the sugar daddy, he was just giving her tons of money and jewelry. And of course, word started getting around, and they were the talk of the town, the gossip of the town, I should say, of New York. Now, Josie also had a wandering eye, and there was a party that Big Jim had. He had many parties, but this party, he had this partner. The guy's name was Edward Stiles Stokes. And he's like, Edward, come on to the party. You might meet a lady. Not my lady, of course. Wasn't thinking that, but that's just what happened. He caught the eye of Josie, and she like fell in love with this guy. This guy was really good looking, this Stokes guy. So there it is. Now the affair starts. Stokes promptly left his wife. He was married. He had kids. Oh, what does that matter? I'm going to go be with Josie. After that, the affair developed. They said, you know, we can make some money. We can make some money off Big Jim. So in an attempt to make a bunch of money, they tried to extort him, basically. They threatened to publish these letters that I guess Big Jim had written to Josie way back when, love letters. And I think it was out of embarrassment, or apparently there were some insinuating things of illegal activities. But in any case, they're like, hey, Big Jim, you better, you know, we need money. And this was all kind of handled through Josie. And then Big Jim said, you know what, I'm not going to pay you a dime. And I think this is kind of where Jim made his big mistake, is he underestimated what was going on, but he said that, you know what, I'm going to go over and visit Edward Stokes, my friend here, and I'm going to tell him what I think. So he goes over there, knocks on the door. Edward's like, Jim, what's happening? Well, he knew something was happening, and he basically told him, he said, Ed, don't see Josie. She's my girl. And Ed's like, what are you talking about? She can choose any man she wants. Word got back to Josie, and what does she do? She's like, I like both of you. I don't see why this is a problem. I mean, can't we all be friends? The plump lady is like, can't we all be friends?
Entertainment. Just give me money, money, money.
Oh, that's not gonna work too good, is it? That usually is not too good of a strategy, especially when you have two dominant men like that. And of course, Big Jim's response was, quote unquote, you can't run two engines on one track in contrary directions at the same time. In other words, you know what's going to happen. So the gauntlet had been made. Edward started to scheme how he was going to get Big Jim. How am I going to get this guy? But in the meantime, Big Jim set Edward Stokes up himself and got him arrested for embezzling. Probably a made-up charge to some extent. Well, if that wasn't enough, he also prevented Stokes and his mother from entering their own work premises. Stokes fired back that he was going to publish the letters, Big Jim's letters that we were talking about. Now it's, hey, we're really going to do this. We're not just threatening. And then Fisk fired back claiming he was blackmailed and got a lawsuit going. In the end, the court had found in Big Jim Fisk's favor, and Edward Stokes had lost his stock holdings in a lot of this process, everything, almost overnight. So he was less than happy. Then, to finally cap it off, there was an indictment handed down against Mr. Stokes for conspiracy to extort money. So Stokes was like, that's it, I'm out of here. But before I go, I'm taking this big plump man down. So it was on January 6, 1872 is when it all boiled over. Edward Stokes stalked the man, Big Jim Fisk. It was at the New York City Grand Central Hotel, which is gone, by the way, now. But he went there, and he went up to the second floor, and he waited for Big Jim, who was always on schedule. I think he had a meeting with a woman, another widow that he was trying to have an affair with. And he comes in the hotel, and he comes up the stairs, and there's Edward Stokes on the upper landing, and he sees him, and he starts heading down, and he draws a gun out of his pocket, and he says, "Now I've got you." And he shot him. He shot him a couple times. First shot hit Big Jim in the arm, but the other found his stomach right in his huge belly. How could you miss it? And Jim hit the floor. That second bullet turned out to be lethal. Big Jim, he was only 36 years old, died the next morning, but not before identifying Stokes as the killer. And there were other witnesses. It wasn't hard to figure out. Well, what happened next, of course? Apprehended, charged, trial, and you get the crazy pleadings. It was in self-defense. Oh, that didn't work. And he started talking about how he lost sanity and emotional turmoil and anyway, other crazy stuff. And what kind of confused matters was that when they were treating Big Jim Fisk before he died, they had done some things wrong to the stomach wound, so there was a malpractice thing going on, so that kind of clouded things. But it turned out that, beyond there were hung juries, there was 3 trials, and on the 3rd trial he did get convicted for manslaughter. And he got a 6-year prison term, of which he would only serve 4 years. I think they put him in Sing Sing Penitentiary. After his release, kind of disappeared from the scene. He lived until 1901, and he died at the age of 60. So Fisk's body, Big Jim, was laid out for public view in the Grand Opera House, which I believe he had owned. And there were like 20,000 people that came to pay respects, with 5 times as many people waiting outside trying to see the notorious Big Jim Fisk. The letters were published. They were published in the New York Herald about a week later. Nice. Letters turned out to be a pretty big disappointment because it was mostly mushy stuff between lovers. Not a lot of stuff that was illegal or really interesting. We are at the grave of Big Jim Fisk. It's unmistakable here, and it is remarkable. Somebody spent some money. Now, as I look here, I haven't, again, checked this out, but as I stand here, there are a lot of graves here. Now, I do believe Fisk did serve, and he would show off his uniform. He really didn't go to battle, but I'm guessing this looks like Civil War veterans, right? Flags. So not a family plot, but let's take a look at this amazing stone. Now the first thing I notice here is that typically that oval shape you see at the top, that recess is for typically a relief of the face, kind of like what we saw at Harmony Grove, Levi, Woodbury. Same kind of thing, and it's gone now. Was it chipped away? Was it stolen? But actually, you know what? Now that I look at it, check this out. You can see there's a pin. So there was a relief sculpture of him, I'm sure. And here it says, Colonel James Fisk Jr., born April 1st, 1835, died January 7th, 1872. And then it's Lucy. Oh, Lucy's buried here too. Lucy D. Moore, his wife, born October 10th, 1839, died February 18th, 1912. Somebody did put an American flag here. It looks to be about it, other than these just amazing sculptures. Hand carved, right? This is all marble. How much did this cost? I would love to know. Well, when you have unlimited wealth, it's not going to be a problem. They're holding up pretty well. The faces actually are pretty melted away. The faceless beauty. But here, this one is holding up much better, but less a nose. Part of the nose is still there. And she has a book. And the book says Railroad? Can't read it, but I'm sure, you know, on the 4K you'll be able to see it. Just amazing. I mean, this is just one of the most amazing monuments that I've really come across. Well, what happened to Josie? Where did she go? Well, her life quickly declined. She was pretty much shunned by all people. She was especially despised by women. Women thought of her as she was, as a lush, as a, you know, sugar daddy recipient. What do you call that? Sugar baby? Her life was really just about using men. They would not even let her check into hotels. So she eventually moved to Paris, France. And it is there that she managed a salon. But eventually it was rumored in the spring of 1873 she would return to the States. She really disappeared from the public eye. I mean, there were reporters trying to find her for a long time. And it was in October of 1891 when Josie Mansfield married a guy named Robert Livingstone Reed. He was an expatriate American lawyer at St. George's Church, Hanover Square, London. And just like the other men, he was just enamored with her, I think mainly by reputation. Who knows what she looked like at that point? She probably was a blimp. And it is said that she just abused him. He would end up being sucked dry by her, and he'd actually end up in an insane asylum, but thankfully he made some recovery efforts after she abandoned him, disappeared, and she'd end up back in Paris. 1931, she was on one of her many shopping escapades, spending someone else's money, I'm sure. at the department store. And it is there when she had this accident. Well, she actually collapsed. Now, she was taken to the hospital, and it is there where she died at the age of 83. Afterwards, her physician certified the cause of death as stomach cancer, and she was buried on October 29th, 1931, as Mrs. Helen Josephine Mansfield Reed, in a grave beside her mother's on the southern heights of Paris. Interesting, there were only 2 servants there with one friend attending her service at the American Cathedral of the Holy Trinity, and it was only those 3 who went to see her buried. So she was an outcast. So here we stand before the grave of Big Jim Fisk. Well, kind of got what you deserved. But anyway, I will say rest in peace, my man, my big man. Yeah, it's quite a story. Rest in peace.